get my head in the game a little bit. Sorry to everyone who didn't know and now is finding out. First, let me know how the sound's coming through. It's been an interesting couple of days. I got, as you can tell, if you listen to the video I did with Will Hess and Zach on the future of apologetics, I was not well, and now I'm still not well, but I'm at least better. And so I figured I am overdue for a Patron Q&A live stream. And so I figured now was as good a time as any to do this. So welcome to the New Testament Theologist YouTube channel. I'm Nick, and oh boy, it's going to be an interesting day. So what I usually do for these is I shout out or send out something to my patrons, and I basically go, well, hey, do you have any specific questions you want me to muse about for a live stream? And stuff like that. And a few of them said, yes, here's a couple questions. And so I figured, well, I might as well answer them. And so apologies for me looking down. We don't have that Capturing Christianity money here. But it's good to see everyone. Good to see y'all in the chat. So what I'll do for this one is I will answer their questions, probably take about a half hour or so, and then open it up to y'all. If y'all do the at New Testament Theologist Q, then ask the question. I'll happily try and answer those. Don't do them like right now though, because I'm not going to be able to follow them, and I'm just not going to be able to do that. But first, what's up, Nate 2D2, my boy, Mr. Green? Always good to see you. Sorry about your face again. JD, what's good? It's good to see everyone. So I'm just sharing this right now on my socials. We're live. We do this professionally here, meaning you can hear me typing. And boom, there's that. And then we got there. And then I got to do this. But yeah, some really good questions on, excuse me, the topic of women in ministry. How's it going, Derek? Good to see you, bro. And you're going to have to, I was under the impression it was Baylor, like the university, but I'm guessing it's probably a little more nuanced than that. Let me know in the chat, Derek. But I got a couple questions from Clayton and Ezekiel, and so I'll answer those. They're questions on women in ministry and theosis and Baptist theology. And so, sorry, I'm a little winded. It's problem. Yeah, I think it was the flu. It didn't have any of the symptoms or anything else that, of the virus or the thing that shall not be named. Didn't have any of the symptoms for that. Just, it felt like just a normal, really, 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 really bad flu. But I hadn't gotten sick in like a year, basically. So I think I was just overdue. Beeler. Okay. Right on. Well, good to see you, bro. Let me share this to the Trinity Radio group because nothing happens if Jonathan Pritchett doesn't see it. The crud. Yeah, just all this. Just the worst. So just posting that right there. There we go. All right. Good to see all y'all. Happy to be here. And I'm putting that there. And Metallica calls it creeping death. Yeah, that sounds about right. A little more of it, I feel like it'll be sanitarium. Although, on the plus side, friends, this morning was the first time I was actually able to eat anything for 3 days. I couldn't eat a single thing I didn't eat a single thing really since Sunday night. I had a few bites of, goldfish. Like a bowl of chicken noodle soup, but not much. And so it's a good way to lose weight. Said mostly in jest. All right, so let's dive into these. Let me know if the audio is good or bad. I can tweak a little bit here and there. But Clayton, we're going with the first question that Clayton asked. He said, what are your thoughts on theosis and how the evangelical church can flourish if we adopted it? So theosis, for those who don't know, is very similar to the Wesleyan doctrine of entire sanctification. But I had a note here pulled up for theosis. This is from, no, I don't want to go there. Sorry. The first site that came up is CARM. And I'm like, well, CARM's probably not the most helpful source. Orthodox Road. I think I saw this one. Let's see. Theosis essentially is what they often called divination or divination of souls. Becoming as Second Peter or 2 Peter says, 2 Peter 1:4 says something along the lines of participants or partakers in the divine nature. And so it's kind of a theological credo where you have the idea in the early church, Athanasius and others, the axiom that God became human so that human could become God, or humans could become God, kind of recapitulation of the Adamic curse and sin and stuff like that, kind of returning to what we should have been already. And so, assuming that's true, and I think it's largely right. I think the New Testament does view it and that sort of stuff. What's good, Rocks? And so, if it's true, then that gets into some really interesting territory, because then you have this doctrine of theosis that essentially argues that eschatology and apocalyptic kind of converge now. People like to argue that salvation is an event, and while that's true, salvation occurs in the event of the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus, but salvation is more of a process that unfolds in light of the resurrection, that in light of what Christ has accomplished and done, we can therefore see, we now find ourselves in kind of woven into God's story, so to speak. I just realized I've not shaved. I'm just going to keep going. It's one of those I actually had it written down. Go shave. You look grody. I'm like, well, look very Calvinist right now. So that's theosis. Now, if we use that and teach it and preach it in church, you've got this really interesting thing. You have this beautiful idea that eschatology and apocalyptic have broken in now. And you have it that the future now has a strong sense of place in the church. And that it's a call immediately to holiness. So rather than focused on a future orientation of things, right? That we will have this thing in the future, but we got to wait for it and we don't have to do anything for it. Seems to be misguided. And that's where participationist theology really kind of helps wipe away a lot of those sorts of careless attitudes. Kind of that, I don't want to name theological constructs, but the idea is you have to be continually present and aware and active in your salvation through sanctification and holiness. Excuse me. And if we were seeking that, and we were seeking theosis through the Spirit, and that's what Romans 8 seems to be talking about very explicitly, I would argue, then we have ourselves already being conformed to the image of His Son, which, Romans 8, and then we become participants in the divine nature through the Spirit, that the Spirit is the one who is operating in the world, glorifying us, sanctifying us through the working of the Son and through the power of the Father. And so you have already kind of in my eyes, theosis and entire sanctification don't work at all unless you have a Trinitarian framework. And you can have many constructs of the Trinity, but it seems to require, at least in the New Testament, as Father, Son, and Spirit that are operating together with distinctions, certain things, but yeah, they've got those sorts of things. Yeah, JS, I'll answer that question. Just let me get to the end of these. I got about 4 questions from patrons I want to do first. Oh, my goodness. That's a good question. And so I think our churches would very easily and very quickly and very strongly recognize that holiness is not just a personal thing, like a thing that I do disconnected from other things, that it becomes a task of everyday holiness. Everything I do is a testament to the God I claim to worship, right? And so if we view every action and every deed as worship, as an act of reverence for God, then you have a very strong in-breaking of theosis or entire sanctification or divination or the Spirit being made flesh, or not Spirit being made flesh, the Spirit being manifested in our lives. And that's seen, I think, most obviously through the local church. And as we participate together as the body through joy and companionship and doubts and struggles and stuff like that. But hopefully all that makes a little bit of sense, Clayton. It's a great question. And I wish the church, the evangelical church, rediscovered its pietistic and holiness roots. I think a lot of that would go really far at getting us kind of away of the easy believism and kind of the spectacle Christianity we see a lot of in the world. More so in the United States, to be honest with you. So that's question number 1. It's a really good question about theosis and the evangelical church. Ezekiel asked a really good question. In one of his podcasts, episode 1028, from about the 15-minute mark on until about 35 minutes, worth a listen to see what I'm saying below. Preston Sprinkle. So Preston Sprinkle's Theology in the Raw. Preston Sprinkle pushes back against the definition of leadership and authority provided by egalitarians, saying that is too influenced by secular understanding where leaders are viewed as more powerful, prestigious, and important, and therefore if women are excluded from this, then they're viewed as less powerful, prestigious, and important. He says that egals view too much hierarchy in leadership. He quotes an egal. He doesn't name them. Well, that's troubling. It's one of those where I'm like, unless you cite someone, I'm not inclined to believe that's actually said. And y'all should do the same for me. Unless I say, don't quote me, unless I'm just citing it. But unless I see an actual citation, I'm like, well, grain of salt. Who says that non-leadership roles in the church are secondary and less significant. However, I can't help but feel he's missed the point of some of what he's quoting, as a lot of egals are saying is in response to people, to the complementarian or patriarchalist position. What's up, Mr. Fox? Which emphasizes a hierarchical understanding of leadership, usually church leadership. Do you see any validity in his critique? How would you define biblical leadership, and how do you think our definitions impact the women in ministry debate? Yeah, it's a really big, really good question. I've been following Preston's Theology on the Raw for a while. I actually had I enjoyed a cigar in his presence a while back. Really nice guy, a lot of fun. Notice what I said. I enjoyed a cigar in his presence. Really, really sweet guy, really, really passionate, really, really fun. Great conversation, talked about all sorts of stuff. I think it was at the Rethinking Hell conference, and I want to say it was in Dallas, Texas area. And I want to say it was like 2014 or something like that. I think I'd just started seminary. No, it's 2017. I was almost done in seminary, I think. I think it was. I can't remember. Either way, it was about 5 to 10 years ago. And really, really sweet guy, really, really fun guy. I think there's a little bit. I get his point, and I take it seriously. I think enough egalitarians have bought into kind of cultural paradigms. The problem is, of course, I think complementarians have done the same thing. So, for example, you have complementarianism and patriarchalists. You know, pick which side you're on with that. You have them kind of arguing for power and stuff like that, that power needs to be given back to these people over here, and they get to have power. And power is seen as more of like, instead of something to be diffused or understood, they view it as more as, we don't want to deconstruct this, we want to have it for ourselves. And I think what I see is a lot of complementarians basically buying into that premise of, we just don't want you to have it. And so we're kind of fighting over this sort of power gun, trying to figure out who gets to have it. And that's, we see it in politics. You know, the presidency is not a place of service. It's a place where whoever has it is the loaded gun we get to turn and fire on the people that were mean to us for 2 to 4 or 6 years ago. You know, so that's, pardon me again. That's generally how I see a lot of that. So I take his comment seriously, but I think he kind of, and this is an issue I see with Preston's work on this subject a lot, is he comes from a very complementarian background. And so there is that sort of tendency to kind of be more critical of the other perspective while not understanding the presuppositions of his own. And I'm not saying that to slap the guy. I think the guy is increasingly aware of his own biases. And I think we see that in Ezekiel's next question. We see him kind of grappling with that very strongly. But it is one of those where it's like, you know, he wants to push against that, and that's fine, but don't neglect the other side in this. And I see too much of people in the middle kind of trying to do that, well, I'm riding the fence thing, and there's money to be made and not taking a side. And all that sort of stuff. So I think biblical leadership, and this is where I might get into one of my thoughts is, biblical leadership is very rarely about a title. Biblical leadership seems to be predicated on several things. The two that come to mind, and there's more. One is the gifting and calling, and that's 1 Corinthians 12, where you've got kind of the Spirit being involved over the entire process. And the whole point is not who's in charge, but who has God called to be the person who does something. Does that make sense? So it's not about being in charge. The New Testament has a very flat view of the church, at least in the way I read a lot of these texts. There's not a sense of structuralism that we see often in modern churches. You know, we've got boards and committees and these sorts of deacons over here and these sorts of deacons over there. And then you have an elder board, then you have a board up here, then you have a senior pastor, and then you have a denominational subcommittee, and then you have a committee, and then a committee, and then you have the priest, and you have all these sorts of things. I don't think Paul or Peter ever envisioned the church in the United States having any of the power that we currently do. The fact that we can vote is probably shocking to them. If they were alive right now, they'd be rolling over in their graves, right? What on earth is all of this? You have this power to do these things? We got crucified for less. We didn't have that power. And so that's kind of how I view it. I think one of the big biblical things is spirited gifting. Very strong emphasis on the gifts and the calling of God. So God, at least as we see in 1 Corinthians 12, is no respecter of persons and doesn't view gender or social status as an automatic promoter or disqualifier of ministry leadership. And I think that's something we really need to kind of recapture. And that was something Gordon Fee argued very strongly in Discovering Biblical Equality, was that the priority of spirit giftedness. Now, of course, there are ethical issues that we need to address. So is this person ethical? Are they living the life of Christ? Are they holy? Again, that theosis, that sanctification. Are they sanctified and are they being sanctified? Are they seeking Christ? Are they living in submission to his word and to what he has demanded of them? Those sorts of things. So I'm assuming that. And if we look at it that way, then we don't really have a basis to tell the Spirit what the Spirit can't do. Now, we can appeal to one or two texts, and Preston, I can tell, is really fixed on one text, and it's one of those where I'm like, Preston, bro, you're not you're an annihilationist. But you still, and it's one of those things I see this in complementarianism a lot, is basically you have guys and gals that go, oh, I'm a conditionalist, but I really got to explain Revelation 20, right? And I'm like, that's the same thing in this complementarian egalitarian debate. Like, you got one text which sounds really, really, that sounds really restrictive. Not neutral, not this, not that, not textually suspicious, sounds restrictive. And I'll happily grant that. But we don't just throw out all the evidence or take all that evidence, and kind of force it into a mold here. We take all the evidence together and we go, well, you don't have to harmonize everything perfectly, but the weight of the evidence says this is right. And this, we just hold in tension and we do what we can with it. And we don't get rid of it. We just figure out what to do with it in light of everything else. And so I do think a lot of our preconceptions about church do impact the women in ministry debate, because a lot of people ask stuff like, where are women pastors named in the Bible? I'm like, well, I don't think there are any, but because you're asking a question that's 2,000 years too late. The question is more, how did people act in the first century when it came to spiritual and ministerial activity? Were there clear demarcations between genders? And Paul, the way he compliments people, say Romans 16, the way he tends to view leadership in, say, Romans 12, gifts and stuff like that, or the people who lead, tends to suggest that he didn't have that sort of bifurcated perspective in play. The Spirit, at first and foremost, was the paradigm by which ministry revolves. And that's why one of those where I see people talk about gifts and calling, my first thought is, how does this comport with your life? How does this comport with everything that you claim? And I think often we give a bit of a pass to people who claim they're called to ministry. And it's like, well, show me more of your, show me your receipts. Show me the evidence of your life. Show me sanctification, right? And so I think biblical leadership must first and foremost be grounded in pneumatology, in the Spirit. And once we do that, then we are free to ask, I think, more first century appropriate questions as to what did people do in service of God together? And that, I think, cuts away a lot of the modern questions about who can preach from a pulpit with a microphone on Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock a.m. And so I think, and that's where I think Preston's kind of pushing back rightly on a lot of this. I just wish he, from what I remember, I wish he did that for his kind of complementarian background. And I think he does, actually, at least in later episodes, but I'm only speaking to that one episode. So it's a good question, Ezekiel. Comment below, let me know how I did. There's always so much that can be said, and I don't want this to go on super, 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 super long. I just don't know if I have the voice for it. Clayton asks, thoughts on Michael Gorman's perspective on Paul. So Gorman is interesting. Michael Gorman is a United Methodist scholar. He teaches at I want to say, a Roman Catholic ecumenical seminary in Baltimore, I want to say. His book is hidden under all the other books right there. But brilliant New Testament scholar, brilliant Pauline theologian. He's absolutely wonderful. I love reading Michael Gorman. His view is probably so you've got the four main Paul schools, right? You have the Lutheran Paul, kind of the Reformed-ish, kind of classical Paul. You've got the new perspective on Paul, think N.T. Wright, Jimmy Dunn, E.P. Sanders. Then you've got the apocalyptic Paul, which is kind of where I fall. So like a Richard Hayes, a Douglas Campbell, and all of these have very nuanced, lots of nuance between them. Then 4, you have someone like a Mark Nanos or a Paula Fredrickson, and then others that kind of Paul within Judaism, kind of the idea that Paul can only be conceived of in first century Jewish terms only, and so there's kind of an allergic, dusty reaction to kind of later creedal formulations of Paul. All 4 have something to contribute. I think the apocalyptic Paul is probably the most correct out of all of them. And Gorman's participationist view of Paul fits very nicely with, I think it fits most naturally with the apocalyptic school. And his view of participation is essentially very Wesleyan. It's very integrative. It views sanctification and glorification as united and complementary. It has a very strong pneumatology. It views the church far more organically. And I think Gorman's stuff is just arresting. It's really, really, really good. And I highly recommend people picking it up. And I affirm the participationist aspects. I just file it underneath the apocalyptic Paul. I'm going to take a second and breathe, y'all. I just realized I'm like, oh boy. Basically didn't do any walking or exercise for 3 days. And I was walking 10,000 steps a day for basically the whole of January. There we go. All right. And Clayton asked 2 more questions. One was, have you ever read George Beasley Murray? I read one book of his. George Beasley Murray wrote the famous book, Baptism in the New Testament. Really solid. Problem is I skimmed it really fast while in seminary because I had like 5 other books I needed to read. Absolutely outstanding book. It seems to have been kind of the seminal book, like it's not been topped or undone, so to speak. So it's one of those books, Clayton, I really want to go back and read or reread. As a Baptist, I feel I'm obligated to at this point. But yeah, so yeah, it's one of those I need to go back and read. I think, actually, wait, no, did he? Oh, hi, Bread of Life. Good to see you. He did a commentary, didn't he? George Beasley Murray did a commentary. I want to say it was a commentary on the Gospel of John. I think it's Word Biblical. Yep, revised. Yep, the Word Biblical Commentary series, the green right there. He did a revised edition of his John commentary. Not particularly helpful on the prologue. That's why I got it. not as helpful as, not as in depth as I thought it would be. I was looking at grammatical stuff for John 1:9 and Prevenient Grace, and not very helpful. Not to say it's bad or the commentary is bad, but it's a shorter commentary. I was kind of surprised by how short it is. And then Clayton asked, and this one is fun, pastoring a Baptist church and trying to teach entire sanctification. How to? And I'm like, whew. Mark Ridland, Trogdor, burninating, my throat is on fire. Oh, my goodness. So, one of the things I know is Baptists, depending on the stripe of Baptist, right? You've got, if you're kind of, here's the thing. Do I have the book here? No, I don't. Dale Moody's Word of Truth, I want to say is what it is. Written in 1981, was probably one of the first big bombshells dropped in the Southern Baptist Convention because he explicitly argues against once saved, always saved, and he really strongly affirmed apostasy. He was a systematic theologian, taught at Southern Seminary for like 35, 40 years, was really well respected, very, very good writer, ahead of his time on a lot of stuff, very, very ecumenically wise, very, very good. It's a very good book. It's old. It's 1981, I want to say, is when it was published. And he passed away around that time too, in the 80s, I want to say. But brilliant writer, and argued very strongly in favor of apostasy and or the possibility of apostasy, whereas the traditionalists and provisionists and many Southern Baptists, and probably some American Baptists too, don't even affirm the possibility of apostasy. So I'm already in that weird phase of being a Baptist who affirms apostasy. But then I look at Dale Moody, I'm like, well, smarter people that were probably more conservative than I am, although at this point probably as conservative as he was, because he was pretty conservative. We say the same thing, so we're there. And so I don't think on the face of it, entire sanctification is at all out of step with Baptist theology, generally speaking. Now you've got distinctives that people like to have, but... So what I do is this. One, I do my best just to stick with the text. Not to impose my views or anything like that. I don't think a pastor, barring a major ethical issue, should be swinging the theological banhammer on people. I think the pastor is meant, he or she is meant to be a shepherd, meant to cultivate and curate people, not tear them down. And it's one of those where I brought it up and talked with people because we went through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and it came up a few times, perfection language. And, we went and looked at other passages that kind of seem to speak to it. And they kind of, it's an older Baptist church, they're wise. And they're kind of sitting there going like, well, how does that work? Kind of like, so not just automatically writing it off, but just like, okay, well, how does that work? And Baptists, for our best, at our best, we are people of the book, meaning if you can show me in Scripture, I'm at least willing to be persuaded that this is reasonable before I'm persuaded that it's true. Baptists, I think, at our best will go, well, you may be wrong, but you've shown me that you're not crazy and that you care about the same book I do. And so that's where the conversation has to begin, at least for me. And so I noticed that when it was brought up, we had a really good conversation just about that, and some of them have been raised Methodist, come from a Methodist background. And so that's already kind of familiar to them as well. And so part of it is just staying true to the text. If the text, the same thing with preaching, where the text leads, go where the text leads as best as you can. And so that's number one. Number two is draw out the meaning of the text for them. 3, show them that this is a widely accepted view with strong roots in history. It's not just something new. And part of it is assuring them, like, don't worry, this entire sanctification is not like salvation. It's not like salvation. It's not like, and I pointed out, it's like, if you're wondering about your status, like, have you leveled up enough? You're thinking about this incorrectly. And I would be thinking about it incorrectly too. The whole point is not to be fixed on attaining status. I said the point is a strong doctrine of the Spirit will remove that impulse to see ourselves in light of status, in light of that sort of thing. And that's another aspect of church ministry that I think gets overlooked, is we place a lot of emphasis on status in the church. And I think that's just absolutely abhorrent to, say, James's theology, right? And I think a lot of modern church loves having status. We love status. We can look at some people in the Southern Baptist Convention that were out of ministry for 5 minutes and now they're back after admitting to the things that disqualified them from ministry. So a big part of it is being humble with Scripture, being convictional about Scripture, but also recognize too, sometimes people just aren't able to hear something. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It doesn't mean they're stupid. It doesn't mean they're hard-hearted. Not everyone has to agree with you. Not everyone has to do that. What I told someone when they didn't, I said, look, you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree. You can read this text in a different way. And I gave him another reading of it. I said, but the whole point of this text for all of us here is we are called to be holy, or I went to the Gospel of Matthew, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. I said, that's the hardest verse in the Bible for everyone because we all know we fall short. The whole point is, though, because we fall short, we have to be dependent on the Spirit for sanctification and for holiness and for righteousness. And that, I said, this is both a demand of us from God the Father, and also something I think that God the Father wants from us. But God the Father does not require it in the sense of having salvation. Now, I do believe you can lose your salvation, but I don't think it's the same as losing. I don't think you can lose your entire sanctification in that sense. Although I wouldn't be shocked. I don't know. Having not been fully sanctified, I couldn't tell you. That's one of those metaphysical, philosophical questions where I'm just like, I don't know. I argue I think it's strongly possible or even probable that some people will be fully sanctified by the Holy Spirit in this life. Will we know who they are? I don't know. In my guess, I think the whole point would be you probably wouldn't know because that's not the point. The point is this person is a gift to the church. He or she, maybe through wisdom and age, has seen the world, is saturated in the Scripture, has overcome sin and abuse and death in her life, and is living a life of pure light that is gentle with others, that turns the other cheek, and she just loves on the church, loves on people. And you just think, oh, boy, there's something there that none of us have. And we're so glad she's our spiritual grandma. You know what I mean? And it's one of those where it's like, is she? Maybe. Does she have to be? No. But maybe. But then again, if you think about it, you run the risk of making it all about your status. And I think the Holy Spirit will convict and pull and transform us without ever, I think, giving us the golden sticker of entire sanctification. But I think we'll know upon the resurrection from the dead who was there for who were fully sanctified for the gift of the church, and I think we can thank God for those people, the saints and mothers and fathers before us, and the people that will grow up with us. And so I think just being a Baptist, being like, here, we're people of the book. Let's go where the text leads. And if we disagree, hey, we're allowed to disagree on this and not kill each other. All right, final question, then oh, goodness, sorry. I was throwing up a bunch the first few nights, and my back and body is just, oh my gosh. Sorry if that's too much information, y'all. There we go. All right. Ezekiel asked the last question. It's a good one. This is the second part of the two-parter he asked about Preston Sprinkle. He says, in another podcast, episode 1041, Preston Sprinkle walks through the various positions on the context of 1 Timothy 2, 8 through 15, and lands tentatively on the view that Paul is addressing local church gatherings, albeit very different from our modern renditions. And I'm like, that's exactly right. Do you think that in this passage, Paul is only addressing church services or the wider conduct of the local church? How does our position on this influence our interpretation of this passage? So, church services or the wider conduct of the local church? That's an interesting point. Do you think in the Paul is only? I think what I would say is Paul is only addressing a specific local church service. I get that from the context because the events and the events that prompted the writing of 1 Timothy do not seem to correspond to other Pauline epistles. So it may mirror some of Colossians, but even then it doesn't fully fit. It could be some form of proto-Gnosticism, maybe, but it seems more like a weird bit of syncretism, but also really abusive behavior. And so I think Paul is addressing a specific instance here because we don't have parallels of this anywhere. For example, the 1 Corinthians 11 passage, Paul is addressing what looks like sexual ambiguity and androgyny, and kind of that sort of thing. You know, men should be men, women should be women, and you both prophesy, and you both come from one another, and all of this is from God. So don't blur the line between the two of you because you're both holy and you're both made for one another, and this is beautiful and wonderful. You don't have to be the other, and both of you can pray and prophesy in church. And so I think that one does have a wider application to the local church because you do have principles of prophecy that Paul goes on to enunciate throughout throughout 1 Corinthians, and prophecy is also mentioned throughout, or mentioned specifically in Romans 12 and Ephesians 4 and other places. And so I think the passage he's addressing, I mean, if you think about it too, would women abusing their power and status, rich women in the first century abusing their power and status, which is clearly what's going on, would Paul only think that is okay in church services or in wider church conduct, right? My guess is the wider conduct of the local church. I think that makes a little bit more sense just because I think you don't have to be in church for abuse of power in a church service, meaning a worship service. I don't think Paul has that in mind, although I wouldn't be shocked if that's true. I think the issue is more a matter of ethical conduct in the community of faith. Because it's not as if they went to a church building, they went to someone's home. And so there's social decorum there. There's honor shame elements there as well. And so it would apply in some sense to the wider conduct of the local church when it came to ethics, not in terms of who gets to be in charge, as Paul seems to be negating that substantially. Doesn't want people exercising sovereignty over another or being abusive to one another. And that would apply everywhere, but specifically it seems like he's focused very heavily on what happens in the small local church gathering. And this wasn't the problem in Rome. This wasn't the problem in Ephesus or Ephesians. This wasn't the problem in 1 and 2 Thessalonians or Philippians. And so I think, yeah, addressing local church gatherings, or I would say a local church gathering specifically. It's not that it's a one-off event, but it is a substantial event that merited his response. So let me know, Ezekiel, if I answered that correctly. There's probably a lot more I could say on it. If it could be I'm not quite understanding the question. Maybe I have to go back and listen to Sprinkle. I do remember listening to it and being like, yeah, that seems reasonable. That was like probably a month or two ago. And those are the Patron questions. Jay asked a really good question. He said, speaking of Preston Sprinkle, Do you think Preston Sprinkle and Wesley Hill came too late for the LGBTQ debate? 40 years ago, they might have had a more prominent impact. Well, I mean, it would have been nice to have them then, but I mean, you had people writing about this, a while back. I think there's something, and if any of you want to ask questions, just tag me and then put Q, just so I can kind of track with y'all. I don't think they came too late. I think what they're saying now is being heard better, because you've got people now looking for answers, people now looking around going, what the heck is happening? This was not the debate 7, 8 years ago, right? Like, who saw all this coming, right? Like, people are having a debate on gay marriage, and then bam, this happened. Everyone's just like, what on earth is happening? And so I think they're arriving at a really good time in history when things have kind of erupted and are exploding, and now we've all got to deal with it together. And it helps that Wesley is a New Testament expert, Preston's a New Testament expert, and they are culturally wise. Wesley's book on the Trinity, Paul and the Trinity, is masterful. It's a wonderful book. Seeing all of them kind of come together and articulate all of these kind of basic points about, say, Christian sexual ethics, and having them be kind and right and wonderful is necessary and great. So no, I don't think it's too late. Would it have been better? Would it have been better if they had popped up on the scene 40 years ago? Maybe, maybe not. But then who knows where the conversation would be? Who knows where any of this would be? I don't know. All I know is they're doing great work now, and I'd love to get Wesley on the program. I've got a bunch of interviews coming up. One, I'm interviewing Dr. Mimi Haddad, president of Christians for Biblical Equality. We're going to talk about the history of evangelical egalitarianism. She's an expert. Her PhD's in historical theology, so we'll be talking about that. And I got two new buddies, new Calvinist buddies that are conservative egalitarians, and I'm going to have them on to talk about women in ministry from a conservative, reformed, egalitarian perspective. And I'm very excited about that. I love finding Calvinists who are, I call them critical free thinkers that are confessionally wise, but also aware of what Scripture seems to say. And I don't know, I find most of my buddies are Calvinists, and so I always find it funny. It's, oh my gosh, we can talk about something that we both agree on now. Yes, And so more on that. That'll probably be recorded next week. Mr. Green, question: have you read Diane Leclerc's? I know I'm saying that wrong. Work on Wesleyan holiness theology. Let me Google her. Her name sounds really familiar, Mr. Green. So apologies all of y'all for me typing right now. Oh, she looks really familiar. Okay, have I met her? Sorry, I'm looking her up right now. Just like, oh, she looks really familiar. No, I'll reach out to her, Mr. Green. Her new book, Discovering Christian Holiness, The Heart of Wesleyan Holiness Theology. She's a much sought-after speaker and preacher. Nice. She is professor of historical theology at NNU, Northwest Nazarene University up in Idaho, where she has served for more than 20 years. She served as president of the Wesleyan Theological Society. Yep, that reminds me, I need to repay my dues for that. Was a member of the North American Nazarene Women Clergy Council, is on the Articles of Faith Theology Committee and Church of the Nazarene. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Green. I'll definitely reach out to her. Download her CV right now, just so I have that. But I feel like I met her at some point. She looks very familiar. I got to see where she went. She did her PhD at Drew Nazarene Theological Seminary. Okay, yeah, so, all right, never mind. She's good. But she looks really familiar. Okay, so going back to here. Oh, awesome. NNU, yep. Woohoo, great. Still attending my Calvinist church? Yeah, I mean, I could attend a Calvinist church if they were evangelical and egalitarian. So something like ECO, Evangelical Covenant, Evangelical Order of Presbyterians, or ECO, ECO. I can't remember the exact name of it, but they were split off from the PCUSA, the conservative wing of the PCUSA, and so they're maintain their view of women's ordination while being conservative on sexual ethics and stuff like that. And so I'd happily serve there, or not serve. I don't know if they'd have me. Although was that another church? No, I applied at one of those churches a while back, and I never got a response. But I mean, they looked up and saw, oh my gosh, Wesleyan stuff. Don't blame them for that. But yeah, I love my Calvinist friends. I don't agree with them on theology, but hey, I mean, they're always fun to talk to. Any other questions, friends? Oh, sorry for the voice cracking. It's pardon me. I'm gonna take a second. It's not good broadcasting etiquette, but y'all understand. All right. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, I'm gonna hop off right now and make sure Nolan's still asleep. But blessings to all of you. Thank you again to all my patrons for what you do, and people that were my patrons. Love you. For people who can't afford to be patrons, I get it. Love you. It's one of those where I had to cut ties or cut patronage for other people and maintained it for some. But it's one of those where I get it. Don't ever worry about it. Like I don't. I'm just blessed to be here. So I expect no funding or anything like that from others. So, but if you want to become a patron, hop on over to my Patron. And yep. But either way, Bread of Life, have a good one. Nate2D2, have a good one. Mr. Green, have a good one. Let's see. Roxby, you have a good one. Make sure I say goodbye to everyone. Mark, have a good one. Derek, if you're still here. Mr. Phil Fox, y'all, have a good one. And I guess, yeah, just y'all have a good one. I'm going to take off. Peace, blessings, and may the love of Christ go with you.